Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. We wanted to talk about the issue of what is our responsibility in the environments that we live in. And we find ourselves between the concept of hijrah and the concept of uplifting our environment and transforming the conditions that we live in. There is what we call mafahim, or different ways of understanding the issue of hijrah. Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahmatullahi alayhi, he talks about the physical hijrah and the spiritual hijrah. He talks about the physical hijrah as being that within which a person leaves from one environment to another environment. And we have precedent for that in the life of the early generation, leaving one environment in which one is not able or capable to practice the deen of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. And so that migration took place earlier on in the da'wah, firstly to Africa and then to Medina. And hijrah has remained the concept that has been in discussion throughout the history of the Muslim community, even though we have the text, La hijrata ba'da al-fath. And the idea here that we find that we want to focus on, we want to look at the issue of making hijrah from environments which are problematic, and how it is that some of the scholars begin to discuss this issue. Because a lot of times what we have looked at in our community, it has been a discussion of people leaving environments which are predominantly non-Muslim to go to environments in which you have a majority Muslim community. And that has been the way that many of the indigenous Muslims have dealt with that issue within the context of the U.S. The immigrant community itself, or what is deemed or termed as the immigrant community, they have left the Muslim world and they have come to Western countries for a number of different reasons. But they have taken on the issue of hijrah as well. And so it has become an issue within which you find the Muslim community, they take different angles and perspectives on the issue of hijrah based upon what is within their understanding and best interests. Here we have an interesting concept. الهجرة من بلاد المسلمين إلى ظهرت فيها المعاصي والبدع وقد ذهب بعض أهل العلم إلى أنها تجب إذا ظاهرة في أي بلد البدعة والأهواء والمنكرات مثل الزنا والخمور ونحو ذلك واجب الهجرة عند جمع من أهل العلم. وقال آخرون لا تجب لكن يجب على المؤمن أن ينكر المنكر حسب طاقته بيده ثم بلسانه ثم بقلبه كما جاءت به الأحاديث ولا تجب الهجرة. So here within the context of the Muslim world, we have the idea that is mentioned that if the environment becomes one in which there is distortion in understanding the deen, and it becomes one in which that which is considered sinful or a violation of the Sharia becomes dominant, that a group of the scholars that have ba'd ahl al-ilm, right, some of them have said that it is an obligation to migrate. And so if in any realm within the Muslim community, in the Muslim world, the manifestation of following desire and that which is prohibited in the Sharia, and the issue of distortion in the deen, if that becomes dominant, then there's an obligation to migrate, such as the issue of intoxicants and the issue of fornication. So some of those scholars said there is an obligation to leave from that environment, and they were talking from within the context of the Muslim world. Others said no, that what is an obligation on the believer is to begin to address those issues which are problematic according to ability, and within the framework that was laid down in the hadith. So they gave priority to doing something about it over speaking solely on it, or solely the issue of just rejecting it by way of conscience and within the heart. And in this event, then you shouldn't migrate from that environment, right? And so the idea that we have here, we wanted to see how it was that this discussion had taken place, and I intentionally didn't really bring up a lot of details here because I wanted to get the idea out first, but I wanted to say that this issue came up in a discussion that comes from by way of Shaykh ibn Baz, rahmatullahi alayhi. And so if that discussion came up within that context, then what do we think about within the context that we live in a time period in which the Muslims have had to flee the Muslim world? Like, what is left before us? If we are in environments in which we find that the corruption and bloodshed has become dominant, and we have no way of addressing it, then should we be in those environments? It doesn't mean that we have to make hijrah completely from the country, but from that area. Should we be doing something about it, or should we just leave it? And we can take from this fatwa that is already there, we can say that we can open up the discussion to apply to our environment and say that we either have to begin to constructively address what is going on in our environments, because if we don't address it, what will begin to happen, especially with the issue of violence, is that we will be overpowered, or we have to move from those types of environments which are destructive to our well-being, right? But unfortunately, these are the types of issues of how do we navigate in our environment and what is our responsibility and obligation. Or, these are the types of discussions which are far from where we're at. And that's why we are in a situation where our environments are overpowering us, and what is dominant in our environments are practices and behaviors which are extremely destructive. And so we're going to say, before leaving for the salah, that it is important that we begin to have an understanding that the Muslim does not reside in an environment in which you have nothing to contribute to it of productivity. If that environment is in such a state which it begins to undermine the objectives of the Sharia. Of the objectives of the Sharia is the preservation of life, the preservation of family, the preservation of wealth, the preservation of honor and dignity, the preservation of deen. If those things are being violated in these environments, then and we are in these environments year after year and we're not bringing any benefit, then there's definitely something of a problem that we have in the way that we're managing things. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.